It could be mining, land clearing laws or water, but it's one of the hottest topics around at the moment. What rights should landholders have over the property they manage? The High Court has recently ruled that water isn't property like any other and reaffirmed that state governments don't have to compensate for any property loss. Chris Clark looks at some of the issues.
There's a touch of the magic pudding to Queensland's coal deposits. It's as if the more they dig, the more there is to dig. One day the coal will run out, but not for a very long time. Mining means jobs, of course, but it can be the end of the line for others. Central West Queensland, near Springsure, is home to Lindsay and Tyson, who run the 30,000 hectare grazing property Springwood, with a coal mine on their doorstep.
Well, they've pegged 2 mining lease applications over our country, so over about 2,500 hectares, so they've certainly got designs on part of our country.
The miners pegged less than 10% of their country, but it's some of their better land.
And the mining company's only doing what the legislation allows them to do. They're working under the Act, and the Act to us seems to favour the miners, because governments of both persuasions need the money and the jobs at present for short-term rather than the long-term production of food.
The pressure from mining is one hot topic, land clearing's another. This sort of broad-scale clearing of remnant bush in Queensland ended in 2006. It left Hugo Spooner with an enterprise that can't support him.
At the time of the ban on broad-scale land clearing, we had cleared about 40% of the property. Now, I had plans to clear further. I would have wanted to have cleared another 20%, so we'd be looking at, say, 60-40%. But the blanket ban prevented that. And as a consequence, this is deemed not viable.
Farmers thought the broad-scale clearing ban was the end of the matter, until a state election last year and a moratorium on clearing regrowth.
The trees are shading off the understory now, and we've lost all our grass cover because, as you know, grass won't grow without light, and we've lost it, and we're starting now to get bare ground and erosion. So this is what we...
So can you clear this country now?
This country we're not able to clear now. It's still locked up on the veg map, so it can't be re-cleared.
Well, what does that mean for the productive use of this land as far as your enterprise is concerned?
Productive capacity will continue to drop as these trees get up more and more, they shade out more grass.
And just as big an issue, argues Ian McCamley, is the soil erosion that comes from not effectively managing the regrowth.
And this is the real problem. I mean, not just for us, but for everyone. This soil's been bared off now because it's all shaded out by that unmanaged regrowth. And we've got erosion starting. That ground's really hard and compacted. You won't get any infiltration of water into that versus the grass over there.
To mining and land clearing, you can add water. In a wetter than average winter, the country around Finley and the southern Riverina looks hard to beat. But you don't rely on rainfall here to grow pasture. This is irrigation country, whether for cropping or dairying.
I'll put caps on for a minute, Tony, if you want to go round the other side. Thank you.
Over the years here, Neville and Ruth Kydd have built up this enterprise to over 900 milkers. And running a successful dairy herd means insuring against risk. Most of the water they need to grow pasture comes from the Murray River via gravity-fed irrigation channels. But like many in this district, they also have access to groundwater from this bore. It's a bit saline and there's a limit to how much you can safely use, but it's there for emergencies, like drought.
It was the water that we needed to at least be able to supply some grass to the cows.
The problem is that just as the drought was taking hold, the New South Wales government decided it had over-allocated the groundwater and so took it back.
Well, it had been cut from 1,300 megs back to 217.
So by 3/4 or more?
More than that, yeah. And you sort of, it's quite demoralising actually.
With cows to feed and a business to run, Neville and Ruth Kydd had to go out and buy the water they needed.
We spent about $500,000 purchasing surface water at the start of the drought. We purchased bore water that we once used to own. We purchased it back in as temporary water, and over the 3-year period we spent about $280,000 or just over buying in temporary water that we once used to own.
Greg Sandford was another of the Murray irrigators who lost most of his groundwater through the state government decision. After allocations were cut, the argument quickly moved to the question of compensation.
20% of people didn't receive a cent, and then people were receiving 20 cents, 50 cents, $1 a meg for their water, which was trading on the market at $1,200. Now, it was just completely inadequate.
That's because compensation was based largely on history of use. The more you'd used, the more compensation you received. So if you only used groundwater as a backup, you didn't get much compensation.
My neighbour 2 doors up, he spent $700,000 on spray irrigation to bring his usage down to what we were told we were expecting. And then because he didn't have a high usage, because he invested in efficiencies, he lost the majority of his water and was not eligible for 1 cent. Whereas he just kept pumping his water and wasting it, he would have been rewarded.
This has been a very expensive lesson for irrigators about who holds the cards when it comes to water. They lost a High Court bid for compensation.
Well, the High Court has had to grapple with this issue of water and property rights for the first time over the last year, and what it's found is that under the Australian Constitution, the water entitlements that people have to groundwater and the like do not amount to property. That means that at the federal level, those rights can be taken away without compensation, and it means that the sort of security that those people thought they have actually does not exist in the law.
What do property rights mean? Water security, land clearing and competition from mining all came together under the heading Property Rights at the NFF Congress a few days ago, where constitutional law specialist Professor George Williams reminded his audience that while the Constitution requires federal governments to compensate for loss of property, there's no such obligation on the states.
This isn't about farmers' property rights, it's about the property rights of all Australians, whether it be Aboriginal people, miners and others, and it's about having a level playing field for everyone. That means that no matter what situation you're in, if the government takes your property against your will, that it must give you fair compensation.
Land clearing is more complex still. It's not the state acquiring property, but changing land use. Compensating is a more difficult exercise.
It requires our parliaments to grapple with a set of problems that go back decades, in some cases have never been properly solved. It requires a level of leadership and vision, I think, for the use of land in this country that we simply have not yet achieved. And it actually requires a legal system that lives up to its responsibilities when it comes to fair compensation. They're the sorts of things and the sort of debates we haven't seen in our parliament.
Mitch Hooke from the Minerals Council puts it this way.
You will come to a conclusion that in some places there is an incompatibility between mining and agriculture. But that's got to be done on a structured, systematic process. There should be no prima facie assumption of incompatibility. You've got to have a structured process to work that through. You've got to take account of the community's needs and expectations. They've got to be part of the process. But at the end of the day, it's the regulator that has to make the decision. So you can't put the mining company, or the farmers for that matter, if you'll excuse the pun, between a rock and a hard place.
Paul Sinclair from the Australian Conservation Foundation offered this perspective.
No environmentalist I know wants to go out and destroy the livelihood of anyone. What we are seeking, though, is change in a way that ensures that our natural environment can continue to produce all the good things that we like and provide a sustainable livelihood to the people who live in those communities.
For many working the land, the feeling is of a game where the rules are always changing.
The central issue for us is actually having that ongoing certainty that ongoing certainty not only of your area of operation, the fact that you'll be able to continue to do that, and the fact that you can do what you do best, the ongoing production of food and fibre in a safe, green and sustainable way.
In Queensland, landholders live in a world of coloured maps showing what they can and can't do.
Yeah, the blue was the country that we weren't allowed to re-clear or control the regrowth on anymore.
It's a world that also has its fair share of unintended consequences.
What did people do when they realised there might be new controls on further clearing?
Well, people hopped in and cleared country as fast as they could. Every bulldozer in Queensland was working, and this was the mistake the first time with the actual remnant vegetation. People got frightened into clearing country that they would have never ever cleared.
Well, this strip around the nature refuge here is ideal as it is now before the legislation, because
with these little brigalow trees coming up through it?
This is how Hugo Spooner likes to run his country. Plenty of grass and small brigalow trees. Cattle will browse the brigalow and the trees fix nitrogen as well. But every 5 years or so he needs to disc plough so the trees don't get too thick. With disc ploughing, the brigalow and grass spring back. Not so on this side of the fence where he put a blade plough through. The brigalow won't return. A mapping error meant he could clear this area before the rules changed. It was a case of clear it or lose it as a productive piece of his property.
The problem with that situation is, by blade ploughing it, we've killed the brigalow forever. You can see. Under the disking, it regrows. There are no trees left here. There won't ever be trees left. And we've lost the benefit of the brigalow as far as companion plant for the pasture.
But for Hugo Spooner, there's an even greater irony. A nature refuge on his land is a haven for an endangered species of wallaby. The colony's being monitored. There's no clearing or felling of timber here. But permission was given for mining exploration.
We were horrified at the time because we assumed that being a nature refuge, it was protected from any form of mining. And just luckily, the drilling company, with a little pressure applied, decided that it was not appropriate to drill here, thankfully. But what was amazing was they then drilled on another area of the property which had even higher environmental status.
For Riverina dairy farmer Neville Kydd, who lost his bore water entitlements, it's about fairness.
I think governments write the laws. They make them to suit themselves, and I saw that looking from the outside, the law was made to, if they make a stuff,